Thank you, Bico Cassini, for that.
Shout out Pico, always. How's it going, everybody? This is the Wise Action Radio Show. My name is Nicolette.
And I'm Johnny.
Hope everyone's doing well. Before I forget, don't forget that this Saturday is the big day of play at Rainier Field. So come join.
And play.
12 p.m. It'll be a lot of fun. And it won't be super hot, so it'll actually be really nice outside. So that's this Saturday. Okay. Shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. We're
decolonization, part 7?
Continuing our decolonization conversation, our never-ending decolonization conversation.
Yeah, it'll never end. It's forever.
Yeah. Well, and that's the point. You know, it's not a structured event. It's a cascading structure of events, I guess. I don't really know how to
process.
Yeah. It's
generational. Who knows when it's going to end?
Always moving, always flowing, just as colonization has.
Swimming upstream.
Mm-hmm. So we wanted to continue on that conversation. Johnny, you want to get us started?
Yeah. So let me see. I'm curious about the experience you've been having digging into some of the original ordinances and policies in Seattle. So this is part of a bigger project that we've been taking on with the PACE program with Department of Neighborhoods of Seattle, and we'll be launching a cohort here soon. But we've been doing some background research, especially Nicolette. So what's your experience been like? I mean, just diving in there. I mean, the emotions coming up, etc.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And especially just considering the conversation we were just having with a friend earlier. We were talking about our potential overlapping heritage, potentially being cousins. And I'm just thinking about, in my experience of going through, like ancestry.com to try to find more lineage for myself that I didn't know from my direct family, and being able to find records of family members immigrating from different parts of Europe, and death certificates, and all kinds of things that sort of like provide these little scraps of history that are written down and documented and maintained and are available for someone like me to go and find them. And they only go back so far, of course, but there's stuff there, and it goes into, the 1800s. And I'm thinking about that compared to the research that I've been doing for this PACE program, in trying to find some older, quote unquote, official documents and ordinances for the PACE program, and stuff that specifically impacted natives within the now Seattle area, and not really finding anything until maybe, I don't know, somewhere around the 50s or 60s, probably, in terms of like actual written down legislation or correspondence that was directly about or directly by natives within Seattle. Pretty much anything that was before that is not documented. It's wiped, partially because natives were banned in like 1865. And that sort of exclusion had been maintained for 100 years, basically, on top of just general discrimination, racism, segregation, whatnot. But that directly translates over to not really having a whole lot of paper trail in terms of legislation to sort of follow and track history through in the way that I'm able to do it with something like my heritage or something. So that, I think, the lack of record speaks for something, you know what I mean? Like not really having, and, especially for a country that really prides itself on the stuff that it writes down and the stuff that it documents and the stuff that it maintains and archives, to not have such a massive chunk of history archived and documented it speaks volumes in my opinion, especially when knowing that history comes from segregation, it comes from discrimination, it comes from exclusion and banning from an area, right? Like literally banning people from living in certain areas. And then on top of that, I've been reading Cole Thrush's book, Native Seattle, which every time I bring it up to someone and they're like, oh, yeah, great book, I always feel like I'm behind. But it has been really, really educational in terms of the history of Seattle and the way that things were in a lot of that time that wasn't documented, and kind of doing some resource mining from that, going through and finding what, resources that he used and kind of going from there has been really interesting. And a lot of that history, the only way that it's been documented is it's been documented through the settlers that were there, and in the sort of information that they kept in journal entries or legislation or correspondence or whatever it might have been. It was really coming directly from the archives of the settlers that were there rather than from the experience of Native people. And again, I think that speaks volumes. So a lot of, if there's any sort of historical documentation of early Seattle and the way that it impacted natives, it's always coming from the perspective of the settler. It's coming from the Western system. It's coming from, the white people that are there and sort of like dictating how that story is told. And so even reading Native Seattle, as amazing as it is, I kind of have that in the back of my mind of like, these stories are always going to be lacking some sort, and he acknowledges it too in the book, but it's always going to be lacking some sort of perspective in some way because of that. So that's what's on my mind in terms of researching for that. It's kind of a lot all the time. So
oh yeah, like it's triggering stuff. And
oh yeah.
I'm also curious, maybe we could take a even step back and think about like what the motivations or like the inspirations for us to do this, get the historical facts, get the truth, and share that,
Yeah.
and get action oriented with our PACE program participants. What did the original curriculum of the PACE program look like, and what are maybe some of the intentions, or to address the whatever social justice issues were there, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So the PACE program, which stands for People's Academy of Civic Engagement, it is from Department of Neighborhoods, and they work with different communities within Seattle to run this, targeted for, their respective communities. And so past iterations of it have been focused kind of on, I guess, I don't necessarily want to say surface level, because it's not surface level, but it's kind of standard relevant stuff. It's stuff that's related to respective communities, but it's also basic civic engagement in ways that bring in subject matter experts. It's broken down into multiple classes and kind of runs like a class. And that, while it is functional and works for a lot of people in a lot of communities, we've kind of deduced through feedback, right, that might not necessarily be the best approach for Indigenous people within Seattle, especially within the urban Native
what kind
community.
of feedback, and by who?
Feedback from past participants. I'm not sure how.
We don't need to name names, but
feedback from past participants that basically, to put a long story short, say, we already know this. We don't need to go over this again. And
like, this is too basic.
Yeah, spend time talking about stuff that we're already doing on a day-to-day basis. If we're going to talk about coming in and building out civic engagement for urban natives, it needs to be focused on the history and the impact that the city has had on urban natives, and how to go forward with an action-oriented mindset. So not just talking about things, not just discussing problems or discussing whatever it might be, but then taking that and recognizing the sort of historical context of those things. So, where is the current sort of gridlocks or hurdles or restrictions that people, especially Native people in Seattle today, are facing? What sort of historical through line does that have? Where is that coming from? Because nothing is isolated, right? There's no isolated events, especially not in government, especially not in politics. So where is that coming from? And then how can we take that and move forward through an action-oriented mindset that focuses on uplifting those urban Native voices that have been disenfranchised and have been pushed to the back, but then also doing it in a way that is respectful and mindful and healing, but still kind of focuses on, we're in this system, might as well use it to our advantage. Like, let's do something about, X, Y, or Z, whatever problems you might want to address. So it's sort of coming from that perspective as well. And again, like, nothing is sort of isolated. So you have to have that sort of holistic, multifaceted point of view. And we've talked about like holistic perspectives before on previous episodes of like going into anything, and especially when it relates to Indigenous and Native histories, and especially in urban contexts, you have to have that sort of context to build a fuller picture, because otherwise you're just, it's like trying to watch a movie through a bunch of stills. It doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't actually feel coherent or have like a fully cohesive story to it,
Yeah. It felt like we just turned over the table, so to speak, with the curriculum, and we changed up the format. How would you describe how the format looks now and how we're responding to the feedback, and maybe just share one or two outcomes that we intend to have?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd mentioned before, past iterations have been sort of like class structure style. So having multiple classes with like subject matter experts, and then sort of having not really discussions, but sort of just presentations in a way.
Just like lecture Q&A,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Which again is like functional in some capacities, but not all the time for everyone, and especially not in our context here. And so instead of doing that, having multiple shorter sort of presentations, taking it and having it as a full day in-person workshop, working together to talk about these hardships. And by hardships, I use that term as like it doesn't really hit as hard as it needs to. It's these traumas, these atrocities that have happened that have not gone away. They've just sort of been hidden or buried from the mainstream. And I say from the mainstream I mean like from education systems. Like, Native people know the things that we're talking about. It's not any secret, but it's not common knowledge either. It's kind of like an experience that comes when you have been through that historical perspective. But when that isn't taught or brought to the forefront of a conversation, especially when it comes to like government stuff, you're not actually going to get anything done. So sort of bringing that in, talking about it, addressing it in a way that says like, we're acknowledging that these things have happened, and what can we do about them? How can we talk about them in a productive, progressive way that isn't harmful without having an element of like healing into it as well, which is where the sort of action oriented side comes into it. So having that as a big focus, and then also having like follow-up and feedback sessions that focus on getting information back. Like, how did we do this? Did we do it well? Did we do it poorly? Why? What suggestions do we have? Because that's, again, one of the worst things that you can do in any sort of community is to come in and be like, hey, let's do this thing. And then we're going to leave and never talk to you again or care about how we impacted you at all. So having those follow-up sessions is also super important. So the main difference is going from those sort of multiple small classes to one full day event, and then also having sort of like in-depth, intentional feedback sessions following the in-person event.
And action oriented, even maybe
right,
some collaboration and writing up some innovative policy that is very relevant to.
Right.
So, that's exciting. Let me see, what else can we chat about?
Well, if anyone's interested in this, just to plug it, our application is going to open in October. So we'll start advertising for it in September. So keep your eye out. It'll open in October and it'll start in November.
Any incentives for participating?
Yeah, so there is compensation, and there will be food and camaraderie and network building and relationship building.
Oh, nice. That sounds exciting. So sign me up. Oh, wait. Yeah, we're leading it. So.
You're already signed up, whether you want to be or not.
No, I'm actually really excited for it. I mean, this has been just a little caretaking of this baby, the past couple of years. And, the first year when I took it over, it was like, kind of like, do I want to pick up this hot potato? I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'm going to burn my hands because it's actually the best thing to do, but how to really transform it into something which we're doing now, to take something and make it really meaningful and impactful for our communities. So
Right.
growing it, transforming it, and evolving it. So it's responsive to our needs and addresses the barriers to all of our participants. So really excited for it.
Yeah, me too. It'll be very educational for me.
Yeah. All right. So what else can we talk about?
We got a lot to talk. I mean, it's decolonization going any way you want. A little reminder for anyone listening. This is the Wise Action Radio Show. You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio. Thanks for listening.
Well, one thing that's coming up for me is the fire that happened in Maui. It just burned everything. And I think, there's a whole historical, truth with the whole colonization that happened there. And, even now it's like kind of like feels like it's open for land grab. You know what I'm saying? And all of that stuff. I mean, we can just touch on it very quickly, but what are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about Maui. And it's tragic. This sort of thing is just going to keep happening because of climate change and climate disasters and the lack of resources or attention that's coming to it from, our government and the $700 payout. Like, that's ridiculous. But the land grab stuff is because my perspective of like where I've been getting my information about Maui, it's been coming a lot from Native Hawaiians on Twitter who are raising awareness. And the number one sort of story that has been coming up on my feed has been, don't come visit on your vacation. Stay home. You don't need to be there. We're in like a traumatic event right now. Like, you don't need to come for your Hawaiian vacation. Like no. And the fact that
But what about for us that have been planning so long to go to Hawaii for the first time?
Oh, well, that sucks. Sorry. These people just had a massive climate disaster happen and lost homes and potentially lives within their community. Like, your vacation can wait. Sorry. And not only that, but despite the climate disaster,
I've been waiting a long time for
Native Hawaiians have been telling people to stop coming and visiting for years because of the effect that the tourism industry has on like the housing market for Native Hawaiians. Like, there are so many disenfranchised and houseless natives because of the way that so many like settlers are coming and just like buying up land and not saving it. And then like the hotel industry taking up all this water, and then the military base that's also just there all the time. But in terms of like the land grab stuff of basically people losing their homes and not being able to like get them back, and then that land being up for grabs, which is a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about some other time, because the idea of land being up for grabs is still a ridiculous concept. But this same sort of thing happened in Puerto Rico in terms of like having a massive climate disaster, having it push the natives and the locals out to the margins, and then having a bunch of like affluent white people come in and take that land and then have their vacation homes and not provide back to the community at all whatsoever. That happened. So like Native Hawaiians' fear of that happening is so valid because it's already happened to another island that went through something similar. So it's just like,
same tactic, different place.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's just, oh my gosh, it's just so frustrating to see. And it's heartbreaking because it's this terrible traumatic event where we as sort of like a collective nation should be rallying to help people and to like provide aid and financial help, and that's just not happening. And I always think back to when the Notre Dame burned down in like 2020 or 2021, whenever it was, and millions of donations flooded in. It was like the end of the world if people didn't donate to the fucking to the Notre Dame. Like, and then where is that same level of support for Hawaii, for Native Hawaiians? Like, that's just not there. It's not there in the same way. And I find that really disheartening, especially because people spend the same amount of money going on their vacations and giving their money back to hotels and tourism, and you can't spare some of that money to donate to people who are in need. Like, I find it very frustrating. So those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I can hear the frustration there.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and switch the topic.
Okay.
You pick.
Oh gosh, we're going all over the place today, huh?
Yeah.
Well, I guess in our last 10 minutes we can talk about your upcoming trip to London.
Oh yeah, London. Be staying this London School of Business. The London School of Business.
Cool.
Economics, one of them. Anyways, a few blocks or a few minutes away from Buckingham Palace. So
what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Like I have a friend, a sweetheart, who is like doesn't. I don't know. Like deep down is like, understands that I'm gonna get immersed, in the whole like academic setting around that area with like all of the art schools and the UX research and design, and learning the blueprints of like what is it, just a whole lot of like stuff, like the original complex understandings of like design from the originators of design, which is colonization is a part of that design process. So anyways, she reminded me, she goes, you know who you are and where you come from? Like and I stopped in my tracks the other night, and I was just thinking, I'm like, yeah, I do. Let me Google my great great grandfather, and I'll see what's out there again, because it's been years, right? And I wanted to get an update and describe to her about like who I am and where I come from, and but also I wanted to maybe remember, and she's just like, you're an effing dreamer, you're a visionary. You come from like prophets, and you come from like a group of people who were deviant and defied colonization, didn't move to reservations, and continued to practice ceremonies and language and culture and living off of the land, and despite the Calvary and the Superintendent of Indian Affairs and the Great Father, the President of the United States, ordering us to move to reservations and become civilized and farmers and all of these things. My father's lineage was completely the opposite and resisted all of those things.
Wow.
And that's who I am and where I come from on that side. And I was reading some of the history, and there's so much more available since the last time I Googled. And I mean, it was like spokesperson, preacher, dreamer, visionary, war chief, like all in one.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
And she's like, oh, that's where you get the military perspective, because she's like, you're always saying like, oh wait, hey, there's a military perspective that's coming out, but
got big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure. But I usually don't tell like very many people, like very few people, but the actual heirloom artifacts from my ancestors who were these visionaries, I take care of those bundles and still help lead the ceremonies too, like the annual, yearly, seasonally ceremonies, and it's really interesting that's a part of me that I don't share that much. And she's just like, you have a beautiful mind. Because when I like share a song and I like describe to her like what it may mean and all of these things, there's this whole body of like knowledge. She's just like, that's you. That's who you need to grow. That's authentically you. And she's just like, I see you in academia going down all this whole like road and line, and you're assimilating yourself and you're changing and evolving. And what are you doing it for? You know?
It's kind of like what we're talking about last time with walking in between two worlds. Like, there are so many different parts of yourself that you have to cultivate in order to be a full version of yourself. And just like your physical body, you know, you can work out certain parts of your body and not work out other parts of your body, and you can see those physical changes. And I think the same is true internally for, you know, your mind and your spirit and your heart, in terms of like growing parts of it and maybe not growing others, and having that sort of holistic reflection on like your heritage and your lineage and your culture and who you are as a person in your day-to-day life, and those things all at the same time. Like, it's so important to have that sort of perspective and to come back to that in almost in a grounding way to move forward, and like having those holistic perspectives and being able to recognize your lineage and recognize your culture and like your heritage. Like, that in itself is decolonizing in so many ways. Because even just, again, talking to my new cousin outside, who we were talking about how, as like descendants of like Europeans who came to America, losing a lot of that and not being able to trace it back, and then only really being able to trace back your history within the United States as tied to, you know, a white American. And the way that that impacts the way that you walk in the world is also very intentional, and it impacts the way that you create your perspectives and your opinions on things, right? And so being able to do what you're describing is like such a beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing that is like so powerful and so decolonizing in so many different ways, you know?
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I think one thing I was reading too was during the wartime, and like after some of the treaties and the reservations were set, my great-great-grandfather Smukala was still having these weekly ceremonies with a base of 2,000 people weekly. I'm just like,
dang. Wow.
Yeah,
so can't have stage fright or anything with that. Like, geez.
Yeah. So, anyways, you know, it's something to think about, and to a certain extent, moving out of my community for the last 9 years, going through my undergraduate and now my graduate program at the University of Washington. There's been, this diaspora, this forced assimilation, because I had to move out of my community to get access to education.
Right.
So there is this process of assimilation with me. I'd lose parts of me. I mean, I cut my hair. My hair was long and with braids, and I actually cut it to not get that pressure of racism. Because when somebody saw me walking, it was just
already have opinions. They've made things up about you, and yeah. So maybe that can be, since we're running
the
low
the microaggressions. I was just like, and the way I dress, just I've changed, but I think I'm coming to a turning point.
Nice. I think we're about out of time, but I think maybe we can keep that in mind for our next episode, is that sort of concept of assimilation and.
Damn, this half hour goes by so
I know
fast.
It does. That'll be
hit the music.
We'll catch you next time. Dang, that was a good conversation too. Can you see anything?
Yeah.
Okay, my little computer says something went wrong.